Eventually, African slaves were introduced as a solution. By the end of the American Revolution, slavery became unprofitable in the North, but was revived in the South following the invention of the cotton gin in 1793. The treatment of slaves ranged from mild and paternalistic to cruel and sadistic. African Americans had no civil rights, no equal opportunities, and were considered as livestock in the eyes of their slave owners. After the end of slavery, we've survived the Reconstruction era from 1865 to 1920. These were turbulent years for the United States, as many citizens attempted to establish free labor and civil rights of freedom in the South. Voters in the South elected more than 600 African American state legislators, and 16 members of Congress. And although blacks had managed to progress in society as their own people, the discrimination of African Americans was ongoing, resulting in hangings, massacres, and the disqualification of most African Americans. This was, effectively, the elimination of the African American from any relevant part of American life. In 1921 to 1945, the situation started to improve, and the civil rights movement of African Americans had started to grow stronger. We survived during the 1920s as a result of the great migration of African Americans from the South to the North, increasing our numbers in northern states. We acquired greater opportunities to exercise our rights since oppression in the North was less severe than in the South. As a result, the cultural movement, known as the Harlem Renaissance, spread nationwide and became a powerful movement which proved the power of the African American community and their ability to achieve success in the United States. We survived the 50s and the 60s as the struggles against racism took root and became more vibrant. The Civil Rights Acts of the 1960s were great breakthroughs that afforded African Americans legal rights and provided enforcement of some of the laws by federal government. By the early 1970s, federal agencies followed suit, instituting directives, policies, and training on race relations and equal opportunity. We survived the 1970s, a decade of progress and achievement following the Civil Rights Movement. The celebration of Black History Week was expanded to Black History Month in February of 1970. African Americans represented about 11% of the total U.S. population and accounted for nearly 90% of all minorities in the United States. African Americans fought through barriers in many areas to achieve the equality we rightfully deserve. Many important strides were made in education as we continue to stake our claim in the fields of literature, politics, and military. However, there was still a lot of progress to be made. We survived the 1980s, which took African Americans to even greater heights. On January 20th, 1986, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday was celebrated for the first time as a federal holiday. More visible than ever, African Americans became an intimidating presence in science, government, and entertainment. There was still a lot of progress to be made. We survived the 1980s, which took African Americans to even greater heights. We survived the 1990s as African Americans became more and more free and accepted. Even though the wealth wealth gap was increasing, African Americans were getting more jobs, and black wealth was going up. By 1992, the number of black-owned businesses had grown to 621,000, and the number of black-owned real estate, insurance, and financial lending companies had quadrupled in only 15 years. A small number of African American executives by the late 1990s had become chief executive officers and presidents of major corporations. Even though segregation was going away, black communities still continued to struggle as half of African Americans lived in poverty. Despite the progress of African Americans in America, today in the 21st century, racism exists in our school systems, employment, health care, prison system, and other sectors of society. After the election of our nation's first African American president in 2009, there were increased expectations that America would undergo a fundamental change in attitude about race and relations. However, we must remain vigilant, and cautious, continually evaluating the rightful place of African Americans in our society. We must truly be proud of the contributions of African Americans in every aspect of society, despite our history of oppression and exclusion. We are sole survivors, and we remain committed to America.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring. Ring with the harmony of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening sky.